JPMorgan last week told its most senior sales and trading employees that they were required to return to the office by September 21st. Workers in other functions are also being encouraged to return to a maximum building capacity of 50% in New York. This is the first indication, as I said. So what does that mean? How should we look at that? Workforce needs have changed and work patterns have shifted. If we're to find success in the new reality, our approach to the physical office will need to evolve. We're going to look at two studies, one that was done by JLL and then a piece of content that was created by Unispace. We're going to really dig into what is the future of work and how have needs changed. And to do that, who better to start with and who to have the conversation with? My good friend Phil Kirshner. Phil, great to have you here with Open
Good
Source
morning.
Workplace Daily. It's great to have you. How are you doing? How is your summer?
My summer is, as could be expected for anybody. More than anything, I'm happy to be back in the city, which I was out of for a few months, in part to get out of the city and in part because I didn't have a home here. Renovations in the house I was trying to move into got stopped because of COVID, but now I'm back. I'm in my own apartment. So it's nice to have at least one piece of the pandemic puzzle feel a little bit more settled.
Good. And kids back at school, how's that working out?
Kids are back at school. It is happening. I got one in nursery school still. So for him, it's like there hasn't been as much concern about the little nursery schools as there is for everybody else. Smaller, more controlled environments. So I think he's gonna be okay. The older one is in first grade, so they've been on like a mixed in-person and virtual schedule for the moment, and will in theory go to 5 days in school soon. And knock on wood, it all doesn't like fall off the rails before November.
Good. Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's hope it works out for everybody, right? So, I mean, we have some great content to jump into here, and obviously just to sort of get anybody who is joining, thank you for, if this is your first time coming across the channel, do like, subscribe, do hit that notification bell so you're alerted to each and every video that we go live with. And the whole intent here of Open Source Workplace is to create a community for knowledge sharing, educational advice and guidance, and we look to bring experts in specific fields and talk about content of the day. So what are people talking about? What are the issues that organizations are having or trying to face, and how do we then navigate some of that? And that's what we want to bring to you. So if please do subscribe if you're coming back. I'm surprised, and thank you. Appreciate everyone coming back and revisiting. So I'm just going to jump right into it, Phil. So the first piece of content we want to pull up is Bloomberg's on JPMorgan, productivity falls for staff working at home. And there's a couple of points I want to ask about related to this. So, productivity, and the article notes productivity drops for millennials is what it really calls out. But it does note that some from other staff as well. I mean, why do you think it would drop for millennials?
I don't know. Well, first and foremost, like just using the word productivity is a landmine. Like in any case, and you and I know, right? There has never really been agreement. And as soon as a company says, is my productivity going to go up or down? The consultants say, how do you measure productivity? Can you prove it right? Like, so knowing that it's sensitive, just to begin with, I think what's interesting was to hear JPMorgan echo something that we're starting to see in results of other industry surveys that like you or I or people listening in would be familiar with, say like Leaseman and some of the stuff that IFMA has been doing about, concern for like the younger, and that doesn't necessarily mean younger like age wise, but newer to a company employees. That working from home like may be great when you like have credibility for yourself, you've got your network, you're established, and maybe if you're older, more successful, you are fortunate enough to be able to like carve out space for yourself. But when you are, again, like quote unquote younger, it is more likely that you may be like sharing accommodations in a city, especially like New York, that you're working from a kitchen table and not like a desk, and that you were still trying to find your footing, like at that company, and even as a professional, like someone. Are you confident enough to like cold outreach someone who's maybe at a different seniority level or in a different group, and without feeling like you're going to bother that person? Like this is a universal part of like growing up in the corporate world, especially the corporate world, right? Like if you're 24 and you go into like a small startup, the community, the way the communications patterns happen and like what's allowed and how people like treat each other is very different than like a bank or an insurance company, a pharmaceutical company, like a true corporate. It's really hard to do that when you're by yourself, like maybe with 3 roommates. And so like Leisman is already citing that there's huge differences in the effectiveness of your home environment depending on physically where you are sitting. Like you or I are in, like we're in nice chairs and like a quiet room. If I had 3 roommates, like, and we're struggling at a kitchen table and I don't really have like a desk, period, the end, like it's going to be worse for me no matter what I do. And also citing that things like learning and mentoring and onboarding, it's just harder because that stuff usually happens passively. It's like apprentice model, right? You come in and the boss doesn't expect to get a phone call. So they get a phone call. They physically see that you're not totally locked up and like drag you into a room. And maybe the technology will fix that one day, but right now it doesn't. So it doesn't surprise me to hear them say that, like, the kids are struggling.
And there's a couple of other little points here that we spoke before we got on that I think are really interesting, right? We talk about the productivity, but productivity drops Monday and Friday. I think we'd both acknowledge whenever we look at utilization data pre-COVID, Monday and Fridays were probably the least utilized days within office space. So we could determine, or we could make whatever assumptions we want on that around productivity. But it's very interesting that they're able to call out Monday and Fridays as issues or concerns.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, not for holidays alone, right? And then the weekends, if you do averages across the year, those 2 days are always been the lowest. I have known some companies, including at least one other big bank, that have been like very focused on not just like the Friday drop off, but the difference between the rest of the week average and the Friday average. Like it's seen that as a real management focus. And yeah, as you said, like there has, with all the focus on like how many days are we all going to want to come back in, this is one of the first articles that I've seen that calls out the Monday Friday thing. And like, which on the surface is fine, but it's gonna cause problems in the future, right? Like if in normal times when most people came into the office most of the time, there was already a difference between like midweek and Friday. Right. But now if the more people have autonomy, like that gap is just going to get bigger, which causes 2 problems. One, that means your office is maybe more empty on, let's just pick on Fridays, than it was before. So what do you do with that? Because some facilities are like not that smart yet, and you may not really be able to control, power down certain parts of the building. And instead of having like one floor of 5 well utilized and the other floor, 4 sort of shut down for the day, you've got 5 floors very sparsely utilized because people are going to neighborhoods or wherever they're like assigned. So you've got the problem on the Friday, and then actually you're creating even like peakier peaks for yourself on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because everyone like rushes in because those are the days that they want to be there. Right. So I think it implies like a future challenge for the intelligence of the facility itself.
Yep.
But then also challenge like, I wouldn't want to take it for granted that people are never in on a Friday, right? Like one of WeWork's former clients while I was there and like in the early days of the Powered by We business, like very famously for WeWork anyway, stated that the problem they were trying to solve was the Friday problem. Like we are really acquisitive. Like we've have lots of smaller brands and companies that we've absorbed over time. And like no one shows up on Friday. So we look at that as a missed opportunity for time that those people could be getting to know one another and like integrating these products. So the question became, how do we socially engineer people to want to come in on a Friday? And I think that's an interesting, like, offshoot of this problem. Like, just because they naturally don't want to doesn't mean you shouldn't put in the energy to make them want to.
Right.
Uh,
So
and it could be
how did they do
could be
that?
a very different day. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, this was, of course, was a WeWork answer. So it was, having an embedded WeWork community team that was working with the human resources team, like, on that problem. It was like, okay, for the first couple of weeks of this engagement, we're gonna stack our activation budgets and event budgets, like, to Fridays,
Mm-hmm.
and start with, like, really interesting and splashy, like, breakfast events, so that people want to come in, and maybe they still leave early, but then, like, you slide it back to lunch or midday events, or eventually you institutionalize, like, a Friday happy hour,
Yeah.
where, like, leaders show up and interesting maybe demos are done, and if you make something like that a ritual, people will come in, and you could, give everyone their focus time at home, and maybe, like, the midweek becomes, like, very group oriented collaboration, right? Like, this is when we come together for our stand-ups and get work done. And then you're sort of cheating a social element, but that's a real, like, culture and morale booster to a different day. So, like, why take it for granted that they won't be there if you could incentivize them to be there? So
Yeah. And
they resolve that.
yeah, no, and from that, so I mean, there's two things fun from that. One is obviously JP Morgan have made the decision. Okay, we're going to ask people or request people or encourage people. So should other organizations be looking at this and going, okay, perhaps we need to be doing something as prescriptive or that sort of type of strategy, or do we allow people to come in whenever they want to come in? Because, as humans, as employees, we're going to choose the path of least resistance or whatever needs to get done. But ultimately, eventually, we're all paid to perform a service, and we have to then learn what is the best environment for me to best produce and to provide that service to the organization. So if and then taking what you just said, where you take that prescriptive, where you want to encourage people to come in on that Friday, there's got to be lessons there that we can then adopt to other days in the week as we want to bring people into the office and maybe take some of those lessons too.
Yeah, I think, like, the individual wants total autonomy, right? Like,
Right.
I want to do what I want. And I don't like it when the company tells me what I must do. But I think people are much more tolerant of decisions that are made at the team level.
Yeah.
So, like, and especially now, where, like, it is not really practical or safe to tell everybody to come back in, and the company, writ large, like, and I'm not just talking about JP Morgan, people may not like if the company was like, thou shalt come back into the office because I tell you to, right? Like, but if I'm in marketing, and, like, the marketing team is saying, hey gang, like, we all know this has been wearing on us a little bit. So, like, how could we maybe coordinate a day or an event or something specific where we can try to come together, and maybe that's at the office if it's safe or practical to do it, or maybe it's somewhere else. And that I think the employees would be very receptive to that, right? It's like, it's my crew, and be like, maybe even we all go in and we do it for this one day, and we've coordinated with the building. We know where, like, is a good spot for us to go, and people will be following the rules. And yes, we're asking someone to commute, but, like, within my tribe, it's not as bad as the company be like, you must.
Right.
And I think we're going to see more of that, like, and the power going to the team and to the project, as opposed to the organization itself. So yeah, like, I think, as opposed to, like, having the company say you all should come in, maybe we need to hear more of, like, trying to encourage specific sub communities to find ways of safely managing times to get together, which wouldn't feel so harsh. Like,
Right. Yeah, and I was, taking what you just said, some of the things that have gone through my head is, how can we gamify people get into the office? So, for example, if you take that team concept, if one or two members of that team are getting into the office, those who haven't quite, chosen their desk or indicated they're going to go in, get a notification, Joe or Samantha's going into the office, and do you want to go meet them for a cup of coffee or something? So that almost within your tribe, it does sort of start to generate some of those that stickiness, to sort of pull in. which actually kind of leads us into some of the next piece of content that we want to touch on, which was a report that JLL put together, and this kind of summarizes the report. And obviously JLL what they've discovered is that remote work will not be the permanent future. Offices will adopt to many different types of forms, and the hybrid model is what they want to talk about. But the four strategies that they've noted, no one size fits all, the hybrid model, elastic workplace, and I love that concept, and I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. And obviously the I've just lost my eyesight here in what the last one is. So I'll get
responsible enterprise.
There you go. And that responsible enterprise. So enterprise focus on employee performance and employers' responsibility in the workspace. And when I was reading this, Phil, I'll look at your view on it, but I looked at this and I read it and I went, well, is this really evolutionary, or is this how we always looked at it? But maybe we're looking at it in a different way, through a different lens, for a different time, because I would say that, those were still all the mandates that were actually required. The answer may be different, but actually we probably should have been looking at this anyway.
I totally agree. And again, out of disclosure, JLL, my former employer. Love them, still love them, love this report. Yeah. I was just really glad. I and other consultant types have been saying like one size fits one for a long time. But right now, especially with like so many organizations have like seized up and are trying to figure out what to do, that they're looking at what everybody else is doing. Yeah. Right. JPMorgan makes the news, or Fujitsu makes the news, right? Google, what's Google doing? Oh my gosh, what Google's doing. And I just want to say, like, it's nice to see someone codify that, like, what they're doing is not necessarily going to work for you. So like run your own race a little, model the work that gets done for you and the tools and spaces that are needed to do that. Mm-hmm. And recognize that there's so many permutations of policies and mandates and available spaces and et cetera, that like, it's like no two snowflakes being exactly alike, right? Like you will not be able to mirror somebody else's program, so don't make that your top priority. The hybrid model, like core, flex, and distribution, that I think you're right. Like the Inside Baseball crowd has been talking about that for a long time. Like this is coming. It's just like snap woken up overnight as the new thing. Mm-hmm. And that, JLL, Cushman, CB for years have been saying, like, if you take up a lot of space in this world, why on earth in this moment would you try to solve for that all like the old way? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Take advantage of the flexibility that is available to you everywhere. Right. So that's not like that new, but that we're seeing a lot of the word hybrid, because you're like, okay, whatever you're going to do next is not the old, like we all come back in, and it is not what we're doing now with everybody staying home. It is something in this enormous gray in the middle. Right. But with gray comes uncertainty. I like also that the report says like the total thinking that like your total portfolio size, maybe you have 1 million square foot portfolio now. It may be 1 million square foot portfolio tomorrow, but it's going to be chopped up in lots of different pieces and scattered all over the place, including sort of people's homes is like part of your virtual portfolio. So that was an interesting concept. And then, I also like the elastic that, to my knowledge and to their credit, I think it was Accenture that coined the like elastic digital workplace as a concept first earlier this year. Yeah, right. Maybe in like March, at the beginning of all this. So that's a nod, I think, to their program, and I just love it. It's a better word than just like agility.
Right. And I was talking with Karen Gill the other day on a live stream, and she called it scatter and gather, right? So the elastic, so in other words, how do you allow people to come together, be it in an office, if you think about how a workplace is designed, or be it people at home or in the office, and how do you scatter and gather so that community still sticks together? And I think the elasticity attached to that, I think, is a beautiful concept. Yeah.
And elasticity, I use the word like magnetic a lot to describe like the ideal future workplace, meaning like as much as I want to scatter, there's something that makes me want to be there that hopefully isn't my boss telling me like, you gotta sit here. It's something else. So elasticity has that too. Like the energy of I go apart, you are brought back together again. like the recoil.
Yeah, and that ties in nicely to what you were saying before, right? You think about you're trying to solve that problem for the Friday issue. I mean, that's 5 days a week now issue. So how do you create that magnetism? How do you create that draw where people actually want to go in and be together? And then when you are scattered and you are apart, you still feel part of that community. And the other thing I sort of love is hybrid means different things to different people. And we have to be really, what does that hybrid solution mean? Because I know whenever I sort of think about it, it is if I look at, whatever office building I'm looking at within the portfolio, I go, okay, hybrid in this location means one thing, but in this location means another. And we have to be very careful. And that's why it isn't a one size fits all. It is the hybrid needs to solve the problem for the individual location and the organization as a whole. I think that's really important to remember
Totally.
as well.
And just interesting to see, like, if you've got 10 offices in 10 places with different, 10 shades of gray of hybrids, how much how much do you care about that variation, or care to be micromanaging or monitoring that variation on a theme, right? Yeah. Like, you'd say, the old adage, right? Like, if you can't measure, you can't manage it. But like, do you really have to manage it? Why can't you allow, local culture and needs to win out? If that's what's appropriate for that.
No, and we have to let that local culture win out, because you ain't going to beat it, right? You have to acknowledge it, and then obviously then to go and design and sort of respect that. How is that hybrid model going to be used? And what I'm seeing is I'm really surprised at some of the ways people are working across the world, and some locations are just flabbergasted by actually what I thought would happen, the complete opposite, or what I anticipated as being sort of the response, just so different. And it is really important to acknowledge. And I just want to flick on to the last, because this is exactly what we were talking about with the Unispace article, and they've come up with a model called Propeller, the new hybrid office model driving successful businesses. And for some, whenever people are looking at the portfolio, yes, some of this is looking for a purpose to reduce the real estate footprint, and others is, okay, so how do we create that destination that actually draws people in? And if there's links below if you want to go and look at the full article. But Phil, the real question I want to come to is like, whenever we look at if there is a motivation to reduce footprint, and what actually do you think is the best strategy when you're managing a workplace? What do you think is the best strategy to accomplish that? In a sense of, be it a seating strategy, be it how you use the office. In your experience, how would you direct people?
If the objective was really like reduction, point one.
Yeah.
I mean, now it's so it's so interesting, and like the Propeller model like very explicitly puts experience at the center.
Yeah.
Which is sort of codifying what a lot of us have been saying about the role of the future office, which is like the thing called the office is going to be very centered on group-oriented activities. So by its very nature, like, should or could be
I've just lost your audio. And I'm sure the words of wisdom you were giving them were just so prolific. Let me just check.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, it's like my cell phone like also picks up my headphones, so I have to wait for the call. Whoever's calling me to stop. Technology, right? So, I was saying that. So yeah, they put experience at the center, and if it's a group-oriented space, and you're not having to solve for hundreds of workstations, like where someone would sit for 8 hours in a day and do their own work, in theory, smaller should not be a problem, like, at all. Mm-hmm. So that's almost like an easy solve. But I don't know. I'm seeing some client, like, you also shouldn't be afraid to cut bait and just be like, now is this moment, like, people aren't in your office to say we're going to get out of a commitment and then solve for the future state, as opposed to trying to retrofit what you have to meet some kind of future demand you haven't worked out yet. Yeah, but I
No.
don't think their model is like so focused on the reduction, right? It's really this: can we put
No, it's
experience on
100%, and it was more of just a fly question in a sense of, because one of the biggest challenges, as you know, at the moment is, organizations are trying to plan for an end state that we don't know what that end state looks like. So how do is there ways? Because some people, some real estate folks maybe ask, okay, you need to reduce the footprint by however much you can. Some maybe just say, okay, we just want to alter a little bit through incremental times, and it's sort of like, so how do we do that? And it's really just trying to glean some knowledge from you in how best to tackle some of those things. And I
Yeah, I
sort of
think.
go
No,
ahead,
good.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, lots of people are sitting on their hands now. I think they'll have leases coming up in a year or two, which will be the make or break moment of like some people are going to take radical steps, and others will, you know, rush to not be first.
Yeah, yeah.
But because of the nature of the beast, like I think we'll see, the first class of people that do something different in a year or two, and then
Hmm.
it's going to be maybe even a couple of years to see the second wave of people trying to respond. And I don't know if they will have the energy at that point to take advantage of the shift.
Mm, that's interesting. Yeah, and I think the other side of it as well is, as we bring people back to the office, is there an opportunity there to sort of shifting the mindset so that actually the employees who are coming back see the office being different as to what they remember? So therefore, you start to encourage the same behaviors as we bring folks back to the office. So, for example, if you had a fully assigned office, do you now start teasing the fact that we bring people back, they may be spread out because only a small percentage is coming in, but actually if they have the ability to select a seat within the office that actually is close to other people who are coming in, does that create a better feeling and emotion? And subconsciously, you're changing the behavior and perceptions of what the actual office is for, as a strategy.
Yeah, I completely agree. And like, sort of final thought, like the having talked to Unispace before and like so many other design firms about
Yeah.
like what's next. And of course, I relate the experience to WeWork only because, especially in the case of like Unispace, which is design build, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the whole propeller, like the propeller model, when you dig into it, gets into like, here are the spaces that we think match really well with like the innovation component or the problem solving component.
Right.
And they're like, absolutely right. uh, and propose some really interesting typologies, especially to a lot of like U.S. companies. They're like, oh, desk, office, meeting room. Like, no, there's lots of other kinds of spaces that have been developed and perfected now that could encourage these different behaviors or at least support them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it still stops at the build, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and I think like creating a huddle space does not necessarily automatically generate innovation, right? You need to spark some kind of activity, and that either has to come from managers and leaders or some like third party force that is encouraging certain behaviors or engaging people into the places where they are supposed to have those collisions
Mm-hmm.
and like have the magic happen. Um, so it's still like you can't just build it and assume that people will come. You have to turn it
Right.
on,
Yeah.
and that is it's like a missing component in all these kinds of strategies. It's just like, who's saying the thing about how you run the workspace that you have just built. It isn't just about how you built it. There's so much more that goes on to affect how it's experienced, if that's really what you put at the center.
Right, right, and that's why I think it's so important that what you mentioned before was trying to fix that Friday problem, because that is the everyday problem. How do you activate the space? How do you become a magnet and create a magnet so people do want to come together?
Yeah, totally.
And it's not really talked about right now because a lot of these firms are all about managing real estate, and I totally understand that, and designing real estate. So I totally understand it, and from my own perspective, it is I'm thinking about, okay, how do we activate space? How do we become that magnet? And I love that concept. So thank you for sharing that with us. So Phil, look, the time's up. It just flies by.
Time flies.
Just flies. It just flies when we get together.
Workplace
But
with my coffee all morning.
there you go, man. There you go. There you go. So look. Thank you. I appreciate it. Look, we'll put links in below for you want to check out any of the content. There's links below to reach out, connect with Phil. So if you do want to reach out to him, please do. Also, in below is a link to a Discord channel. Over in Discord, there is a group that's growing all around WordPress. So if you want to get involved in the conversation, do go click, do go join. Some of the people who have joined in the last 24 hours, we've only released this a couple of days ago, so it's kind of interesting to see some of the caliber of people who are in there sharing ideas and providing insights and sort of helping each other all learn. So it is fascinating. So please do go and do hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. There won't be a show tomorrow. But on Monday, we're back. Christina Herrera is going to be joining us. And on Tuesday, we got Luke Camperman, so really big on change management, activity-based working. And so it should be a nice way to kick off the week. So have a great weekend, folks. Phil, thank you. Great as always to see you. And I look forward to catching up soon.
Cheers.
Cheers. Take care, mate.